It's time to set our lineups for week 4. So our ultimate rankings, if you enjoy this, make sure you drop a like, make sure you're subscribed. Let's start with the running backs for this week, and let's start in the S tier. These are going to be 3 guys that are going to be in the S tier pretty much the rest of the season, right? You've got Saquon Barkley, who has absolutely balled out. You got Bijan, who is really looking good, and Breece Hall. These are the 3 guys, really, as well as some of the guys in the A tier that you're just absolutely starting no matter what. They're the cornerstones of your team. They looked like good picks from your fantasy drafts, and so they're going to be at the top of our list here, as well as the guys in the A tier.
Yeah, Derrick Henry has a great matchup this week against Buffalo. He's obviously coming off a 30-point performance in week 3 against Dallas. I think he's going to continue his solid production and be in this A tier. JT and Jahmyr Gibbs are 2 guys that have pretty rough matchups. You've got JT going against Pittsburgh, and he has an incompetent passer at quarterback. So Pittsburgh is really going to probably stack the box against JT and not let him run all over them. He may have a rough week, but we're still going to have him in the A tier because you're starting him regardless. Same with Jahmyr Gibbs. Mike McDonald, obviously the head coach for Seattle, who was the DC for the Ravens in 2023. And if you remember that Ravens and Detroit Lions game in 2023, the Ravens walked all over the Lions. It was one of the few games that the Lions got blown out, and this could be a trap game for Detroit. That's why we have Jahmyr Gibbs ranked a few spots lower than normal, but his upside is, he could drop 30 points at any given moment. And then James Conner does have a great matchup against Washington in the highest over-under for total points for the week, and I think he's going to have a nice bounce-back game when he was a little bit disappointing in week 3.
Yeah, these are your Fringe running back ones here in the B tier. You've got Aaron Jones, who had a really good week last week and continues to get the valuable touches in an offense that's been pretty underrated. Devon Achane obviously has to move down because that offense projects to be one of the worst offenses in the league without Tua, and that's concerning. You saw Devon Achane come out last week and only have 8 points. I think you can expect that when Tua Tagovailoa is out, and especially against the Tennessee Titans defense, where the matchup in the Vegas total points line in this matchup is only 37 points. So Achane, I expect to have a little bit of more of a muted week. That said, you have to rank him as a running back 1 because you know what his upside is, right? James Cook is kind of the same way. I think he deserves to be a running back 1 the rest of the season. He's been getting the touches he needs. He's been getting goal line carries. He's been really productive through a receiving game, and the offense there looks really good. The Bills actually look pretty good so far this year. And so Cook, I think, is a guy that has been really, really nice in terms of return on investment for your draft pick. And then Joe Mixon. And we're projecting Joe Mixon to come back. If Joe Mixon does come back, he has a pretty good matchup against the Jags. If he doesn't, Akers, Dameon Pierce, they're going to be non-factors probably, but Joe Mixon has proven when he's on the field he's going to be productive this year, so we're going to project him, if he does come back, to be here in the B tier.
Yeah, and then the C tier, we're going to have Jordan Mason and Josh Jacobs up top. Jordan Mason going to continue to be around this range. He had a rough go at it with the Minnesota Vikings defense in week 3. I think he'll bounce back and be a little bit better against New England. And then Josh Jacobs, I wouldn't freak out about him at all. Jordan Love's coming back, so they're actually going to have a consistent, competent passing game, which is going to open up the field for Jacobs to be more productive. And he's had a really solid floor for not scoring a touchdown yet. I'm not worried about him at all, and he was banged up in week 3. He'll be healthier in week 4. Let's talk about Kenneth Walker as well, who we expect to be back healthy in week 4 against the Detroit Lions. Even if Kenneth Walker comes back, Charbonnet is not a unstartable guy. He's very flexible. He had 11 points while Walker had 18 in week 1. So expect Walker to definitely take the place of Charbonnet as the number 1 guy there if he comes back healthy. And he's got to stay healthy for the rest of the season, but we're going to have him in this tier. Expect him to have a nice bounce back game after missing the last 2 weeks.
So down in the D's tier here, we've got Brian Robinson, who's been fairly good this year, honestly, and playing an Arizona Cardinals team where the line for this game is set at 49 total points. Should be a high scoring game. The Commanders offense honestly looks a little bit better than we expected, but you do see Jaden Daniels taking some of those rushing touchdowns in the red zone, and so I think that matters for Brian Robinson. Otherwise, he'd be ranked higher here. Zach Moss still getting the large majority of the work, got 20 points last week, and does play the Panthers this week, and Panthers have given up a ton of points to running backs this year, so we're going to rank him here. Najee Harris continues to get 20 to 30 touches a game, which is great. Just hasn't had the touchdowns yet. He's playing the Colts, probably going to come this week. Tony Pollard has been kind of hit or miss. It's again against the Dolphins. It's going to be a lower scoring matchup. The Titans offense really hasn't looked that good. He continues to get enough work to where he has touchdown upside, and so he's going to be ranked here. And then Rachaad White has fallen down, into the bottom of the D tier here because he hasn't been scoring touchdowns. He's also not been efficient. We knew Rachaad White wasn't efficient. And this is not going to be like we're going to bump Bucky Irving up a ton here because neither of them have been fantasy productive. So this is less of a, we're going to elevate Bucky Irving because he's supposed to get more snaps, which whatever. But, both of these guys have been unproductive. There's no reason to rank either of them as good fantasy running backs until one of them produces. I still think it will be White who's getting third down and goal line carries, but he's got to do it before we rank him high enough in these rankings.
Yeah, and then the F tier at the top, we're going to have J.K. Dobbins. I'm a little bit lower on Dobbins than Avery is. Avery would probably prefer him to have a little bit higher. He's going to be in the same tier as Singletary and Chuba, who both had really good weeks in week 3. Singletary really having a nice encore to what he did in week 2, getting another touchdown, and he would have had another 6 points if he didn't sit his butt down at the end of the game when he could have walked in for a touchdown because, he was playing for the team and they just wanted to run the clock out, which was very, very nice of him. He's a great teammate. But with J.K. Dobbins, the reason that I have him a little bit lower here is because they are playing the Kansas City Chiefs defense and potentially without Justin Herbert. Even if Herbert plays, it's probably going to be pretty rough. He's not going to be super mobile because he did re-aggravate that ankle injury. So Dobbins, again, every single one of these guys in this tier is going to be touchdown or likely bust. So Ramondre is going to be a very volatile guy that we rank every single week. He's going to be a lot higher than this. He may be this low or maybe even a little bit lower in future weeks as well because it's just a bad offense. It's going to be very matchup dependent on what Ramondre is going to be able to do. I mean, you saw his floor was 0.3 points against a good defense like the New York Jets. So keep an eye on that. It's going to be tough going again this week for Ramondre going against San Fran.
And in the G tier here, we're going to have a bunch of guys that really are either running back twos in their own team or they have really limited upside. Rico Dowdle playing the Giants is a good matchup this week, but Rico's not been productive this year. Jerome Ford also not really been productive this year. Zach Charbonnet has been productive, but if Kenneth Walker comes back, we're still going to rank him. I think he's one of the best running back two options to start because I think they could get him a fair amount of work, especially in the receiving game there. But if Kenneth Walker does come back, I expect Kenneth Walker, like he did in week 1, to get the majority of the work there. Carson Steele, he's starting running back. Until he produces at a high level, we probably can't move him up anywhere. Bucky Irving, like I mentioned, hasn't produced yet. And if he does, we maybe move him up here. Gibson and Spears are both, high receiving upside running back twos that still haven't really shown that they're going to produce this year in fantasy football. So you're not really flexing them if you have the choice.
Yeah, and then the H tier is just a bunch of guys that if you're desperate, you start them. Braylon Allen is probably the safest guy because he's getting a decent amount of work there, even alongside Breece Hall. His ceiling is massively capped, though, and he's going to require a touchdown to be ultra productive. But with Braylon, I mean, he's slowly moving up our rankings. He might even get a tier bump in the next couple of weeks if he can continue to get this opportunity and volume. Everyone else in this tier, I mean, DeAndre Swift, what a fall from grace. That offense looks horrible. I think it's a mix of DeAndre Swift not being a great running back, having terrible vision, and Shane Waldron being an awful play caller. It is so disgusting there. And then Raheem Mostert is also going to find his way in this tier as well. We're ranking him here because he's probably going to play after missing the last 2 weeks, but there's not much upside for him in an offense without Tua, where Tyreek and Waddle and Achane can't even produce. So it is just throwing up a prayer if you're flexing Raheem Mostert this week.
All right, let's jump over now to our wide receiver rankings for the week, and let's start in the S tier. This is like throwback fantasy football 2022-2023. We got Justin Jefferson up here with Jamar Chase. How about that? Hey. And, with Justin Jefferson, he's a wide receiver 5 in the season, and so he's been able to produce so far without Kirk Cousins. This is mind-boggling to me. How is Justin Jefferson able to produce without Kirk Cousins? Surely wouldn't take Garrett Wilson over him in a draft, but Jamar Chase is the other guy here, and Chase obviously didn't do anything really before the last night, and he had 30 points, and now he is the wide receiver 11 on the season, and so I expect Chase to get better as the season goes on, but he does have a really good matchup against the Panthers this week, where the line is actually 47 points. So it's a decent matchup for Chase, and honestly, I expect him to have another big week and continue to kind of move up these rankings rest of the season. So
yeah, A tier, get used to seeing guys like CD, Collins, and Amon-Ra walking the line of like top of the A tier, tail end of the S tier, depending on matchup and the upside of guys like Chase and JJ in the S tier as well. But with Neighbors, Marv, and Rashee Rice, I want to talk about these guys specifically because they're so young and they have really just earned their position, really solidifying their position in the A tier pretty much consistently for the rest of the season, barring any sort of crazy injury situation or whatever. But with Malik Neighbors, he's been able to transcend situation and be incredibly productive in fantasy football. He's got a nice matchup against the Cowboys. You've got Marv going up against Washington this week, which Washington, even though they beat Cincinnati, definitely going to be allowing a lot of fantasy points for whoever's playing them every single week. And then Rashee Rice, he is Patrick Mahomes' number 1 option. He got 15 targets last week. He's a top 6 wide receiver rest of season. I think that's his potential upside. And playing against the Chargers, potentially Justin Herbert-less Chargers. We'll see. We don't really know yet. But regardless, I think the Chiefs are going to have a great week, and Rashee Rice is going to continue to reap the benefits of that.
And so dropping down here to the B's here, we're going to start with Devontae Adams. He's been a little bit hit or miss this season playing the Browns. It could be a tougher matchup. The line's only set for 38. So we're still going to start Devontae, but you got to be careful with him. We're going to have DK Metcalf here and Tyreek Hill. I want to talk about these guys because Tyreek is obviously moving down in our rankings. But Tyreek, you have to rank him as a wide receiver 1 in fantasy football. But you know that without Tua, his floor is like 5 points. You saw it last week. And so Tyreek, obviously we're going to give him the respect he deserves in terms of being a playmaker, being a big play threat, and being a guy that can light up fantasy football. But without Tua, it's unlikely that that's going to happen. And so I think you have to rank him here behind DK, who has been really productive this season, honestly. And you saw him have another 20-point game last week, which is great. But DK Metcalf on the season is the wide receiver 7. And that offense looks really good, honestly. The offense looks much better without Shane Waldron. Go figure. And they play the Detroit Lions this week, which the Detroit Lions have given up the 3rd most points to wide receivers this year so far. And the Vegas line for this game is set at 47 total points, highest scoring game. The defense is giving up a lot of points to wide receivers. DK's had a good year. Offense looks good. All of it equates to DK Metcalf moving up our rankings. And so we're going to put him here with Chris Godwin and Mike Evans are going to be back-to-back as well. Look, we know this. Chris Godwin's going to get more targets. He's going to get higher percentage targets, right? He's going to get higher quality targets in the sense that he's getting them out of the slot. Mike Evans is going to get some end zone shots. And if Mike Evans doesn't score a touchdown, he might score 5 or 6 points. But if Mike Evans does score touchdowns, he might have 25 points. Yeah. And so with Godwin, he's a little bit more consistent, but not as high a ceiling as Mike Evans. Mike Evans is going to be a little bit more boom or bust, but both good wide receivers on a good offense where Baker Mayfield has looked better than expected last year and this year. So we'll keep them both back to back for this season until one of them maybe separates themselves.
Yeah, top of the C tier, I'm still a believer in DJ Moore. I think he's going to be fine for the rest of the season. He, in my opinion, is still the top option for Caleb Williams. Even though Rome Odunze outproduced him last week with Keenan Allen out, I think DJ Moore is going to get the consistent target inflow compared to any other receiver in that offense, and he just needs to get a touchdown. I mean, he's shown his floor is like 8 to 10 points when he doesn't get a touchdown. It's because that volume is just so solid in a pass-happy offense that can't run the ball for the life of them. And I do want to talk about George Pickens as well in this tier. He's in the middle of this tier. Going against the Indianapolis Colts in week 4, expect him to score 30 points because the Colts secondary is that bad. Look at the splits of the wide receivers and tight ends producing in the first 3 weeks of the season against the Indianapolis Colts secondary. It is the worst in the league. That is a fact. It is so awful. At the end of the tier, we're going to have Garrett Wilson as well, who I want to talk about. The reason he's not ranked higher, even though he's continuing to build chemistry with Aaron Rodgers, is 1, he has not even produced as a top 24 wide receiver so far this year. And 2, he's going up against Pat Surtain in the Denver Broncos defense, which is actually a pretty tough matchup for him. And Denver hasn't allowed many points, many fantasy productive wide receivers this week to date, up to week 4. So Garrett Wilson, again, he's a touchdown away from being, pretty productive, having 15, 20 points, but that's why he's going to be kind of at the tail end of this tier.
Yeah, and jumping down to the next tier, here's going to be the D tier. We're going to jump into Stephon Diggs, who has outscored Nico Collins twice. And look, we're going to have Nico way above Stephon Diggs, but Stephon Diggs is somebody you want to flex on your fantasy team. And he's got a good matchup against the Jags. The Jags have given up the 8th most points to wide receivers this year. The Jags obviously look as a team pretty awful, and so you're feeling really good about starting him. And JSN, we're going to put here as well. Again, just like DK, good matchup. And JSN continues to get more work in terms of being on the field and being on the field during certain formations than he has his entire career. And so the targets are going to follow, in our opinion. We expect a little bit of a bounce back game for JSN this week. Jaden Reed will move up because we expect Jordan Love to come back. Playing a Vikings defense that has been fairly good, I'll give you that. But middle of the pack in terms of allowing fantasy points to wide receivers. So wide receivers have been able to get their own against the Vikings. So Jaden Reed, he's going to be a Fringe, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 with Jordan Love coming back because I think he does have higher upside. Deontay Johnson, a lot of people are like, yeah, you're crazy for relying on Andy Dalton to prop up his value. But he got 14 targets. He's going to have, he's playing the Bengals in a game where the line's actually at 47.5 points. He's going to have 10 plus targets this week. And so he's definitely going to be somebody I'm flexing this week. T. Higgins and Terry McLaurin, both guys, T. Higgins, we expected him to do a little bit more last week, but it was his first game back. So, maybe we should have tempered our expectations a little bit. But I do think he's going to get better as he gets more reps, and he's playing the Panthers this week. So it's a good matchup for him. And then Terry McLaurin, you saw him have 20 points against the Cincinnati Bengals, and Jaden Daniels has continued to look good. I think if Jaden Daniels continues to look this good as a passer, you're going to see a pretty good bump up for Terry McLaurin in terms of his stock for the rest of the season. Honestly, if you drafted Terry, what you saw on Monday Night Football, you're feeling a little bit better about that. And so he's somebody now that I'm pretty comfortable flexing with Jaden Daniels kind of coming into his own.
Yeah, top of the F tier, we've got Brian Thomas Jr. here. We also have Christian Kirk in the same tier. It's kind of anyone's guess who's going to be the most productive guy there in a matchup against the Houston Texans that actually, from a production perspective in fantasy, isn't really that bad. Brian Thomas is going to have the higher ceilings. That's why we have him kind of above Christian Kirk by a few spots. And then Kirk, again, going to have less of a ceiling, but he has the pre-established experience with Trevor Lawrence. He finally showed signs of life in week 3. I think he could carry that over into week 4 potentially. Jalen Waddle is going to continually be in this range until Tua comes back. It's really sad. He's such a good player. It sucks that we can't see the production actually reflect how good of a player that he is and his upside, but he really has very limited upside while Tua is not playing, just like every other player in that offense. So it's really disgusting. Juwan Jennings also going to be in this tier. Why would you rank him at wide receiver 29 when he is coming off of a 40-point game? Because everyone knows that Juwan Jennings is actually a viable option for Brock Purdy now. I don't think they're going to let him just get free production like he did in week 3. So probably not going to score 40 points again. He could still be productive though. He's probably going to require a touchdown in a matchup against the New England Patriots. So I wouldn't rule out Deebo Samuel to be, if Deebo Samuel is like a surprise start and George Kittle comes back in as well, you're looking at Juwan Jennings in a completely different light, even if one of them just comes back. So that's another thing to monitor going into week 4.
So moving down to the G tier here, we're going to start with Rome, and I don't blame you. I think if you want to flex Rome this week, you do it. He's coming off of a week where obviously he had more than 20 points, a week without Keenan Allen. And yeah, I don't think they're not going to play the Colts defense every week. And Caleb Williams is not going to throw the ball 52 times every week. Now, granted, they are playing the Rams this week, and the Rams have given up the 3rd most points to wide receivers this year in terms of fantasy football production. So I don't blame you at all if you want to start Rome. We're going to be conservative with him still. But we'll kind of see rest of the season.
He's on the up.
Yeah, he is on the up, honestly. Although we did just release a video saying that we might sell him. So I'm sure people are really upset about that. Cortland Sutton playing the Jets this week. Tough matchup. Cortland Sutton continues to be the leading target earner there, but he's probably going to face Sauce Gardner this week. Still above Michael Pittman, though, who you can't even start until AR gets benched. And so that's probably going to be maybe not the season even. If Joe Flacco does come in and play quarterback for the Colts, we're going to bump him up our rankings a lot. For now, I don't feel like you want to start him. Judy, Tank Dell, Rashid Shaheed are all kind of borderline starts as well. Judy, he's continued to be productive. He only had 8 points in his last game, but he's playing the Raiders this week. The line's set for 37.5. It's an ugly game. Deshaun looks awful, so you're not really super comfortable with that. Tank Dell had some production last week, but a lot of it was garbage time, and so you're still kind of like iffy on flexing him. And then Rashid Shaheed, this is probably where he's going to be ranked rest of the season. He can get you 15 points. But he can also get you 0, right? And it's because he's going to be getting a lot of end zone shots. If he catches one, hooray, he salvages week. If he doesn't catch any of the 5 that are thrown to him, then he doesn't score any points. That's Rashid Shaheed in a nutshell. So all these guys are kind of borderline flexes this week, depending on how comfortable you feel with them.
Yeah, and then the final tier, the H tier, kind of just throwing in the guys that we think could have some potential upside, maybe score a touchdown here and there. QJ and Lab McConkey, they could. Again, going to be up in the air with Herbert. We don't really know. Jacoby Myers has a tough matchup against Cleveland, coming off a 19-point game, though, so he honestly might be the safest floor guy in this tier because, Christian Watson, touchdown or bust. Xavier Worthy, touchdown or bust. Wan'Dale Robinson, second wide receiver in a bad offense. Don't really know what he's going to do in a division rival matchup against the Dallas Cowboys. Brandon Cooks, touchdown or bust. Tyler Lockett, is it going to be 8 or 9 targets, or is it going to be 0? We don't know. It depends on what JSN does and how much DK takes away from both of those guys. So each one of these guys, they're kind of a last resort flex option. Look at them to, potentially be productive, given a touchdown or a target in the red zone. It's all about timing, and it's all about just who can surprise, right? It's the H tier. So we're down to like wide receiver 50 at this point.
Right. So let's jump over now and do our tight end rankings. And look, tight end rankings are a mess. We won't spend a ton of time on these this week because really, we've got Kittle as our tight end. We took out McBride because we don't think McBride's going to play. He's in concussion protocol. This is as of Tuesday morning. We've got Kittle in here, who might not play. Bowers, who had 7 points last week. Kelsey, who has sucked this season. Pitts, who has also been underwhelming. Laporta is hurt. Kincaid had a touchdown, but outside of that, it's like he had 5 targets. So basically this S tier, these are guys that you still feel comfortable even putting in your lineup.
Yeah.
That's pretty much where we're at with tight end right now. It is awful. It is ugly.
So bad.
If you have these guys on your team, you just play them. You just play them. And so these are going to be the S tier guys for tight ends are like every week startable tight ends no matter what. And then we get down to the A tier.
Yeah, Dallas Goedert coming off a 27-point game. A lot of that production did come when Devonta Smith was on the field. Devonta Smith goes down with a concussion, probably not going to play week 4. A.J. Brown's status is up in the air. So Goedert honestly could move up our rankings a little bit if A.J. Brown doesn't play. He'll probably just sit tight if A.J. Brown does play. But at the end of the day, you're getting either apparently 25-point Goddard or you're getting 6-point Goddard. We don't really know. It really depends on the week and the matchup and the situation. This week they are going up against Tampa, which is a little bit of a tougher matchup than than the Saints, I think.
Yeah,
potentially. So we'll see what happens there. Jake Ferguson had a nice showing in a matchup this week against Baltimore in week 3. He's going against the Giants, coming off that MCL sprain. He looked fine. I think he'll continue to bounce back and be productive. And then Evan Ingram hopefully can come back healthy against the Houston Texans. B tier just going to be a bunch of guys that are going to score you 6, 7, 8 points tops if they don't score a touchdown, and if they do, they'll get you 13 or 14 points. So it is a total shot in the dark with this B tier, but I mean, as bad as the tight end position is every single week, you're probably seeing these guys in your league mates lineups, if not in your own.
Yeah, and then you will talk about the C and D tier. I mean, these are guys you don't really want to start, but the C tier in particular, people might get upset about, which I don't think they will, but Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely are in this tier. Why? Because they ran in a game where against the Cowboys, they actually had a fair amount of scoring. They ran 17 routes combined. I mean, Mark Andrews hasn't done anything this year. Mark Andrews is not startable. Mark Andrews is being outsnapped by Isaiah Likely by a lot. He had 0 points against the Cowboys. He had 1 target. He only played 33% of snaps against the Cowboys. He's not startable. He's not even a starting tight end. And then Likely, and I'm sorry if you drafted him, honestly, that kind of sucks. And then Likely played 62% of snaps. He had 1 target. He's had 4 targets in the last 2 games after week 1. He's had 5 fantasy points. They're not startable. You do not want to start these guys. They're not top 12 tight ends. And so, we're going to rank them low, but this is absolutely deserved. Yeah, they're going to be in the same tier with Jonnu Smith and Ertz and Conklin. I'd rather start Conklin this week.
Ertz outproduced Andrews.
I'd rather start Ertz.
I'd rather start freaking Brenton Strange and Mike Gesicki.
And I'm not even going to talk really about the D tier. I mean, the S tier at this point is getting ugly for tight ends. So the D tier is like gouge my eyes out. So, with D, you got these guys, you're only starting them if you absolutely have to in a deeper league or in a tight end. I don't want to start any of these guys. So
no. QB, we're going to start with the S tier of all the rushing upside guys, right? It's Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson, and Jalen Hurts. I think every single one of these guys you can count on week in and week out. They've got the veteran experience, right? They're not rookies like Jaden Daniels, who, might put up 30, and he might put up a little less than that just depending on the matchup and how he's going. Daniels will be in the second tier, and it's such a short tier. I'll just touch on it here as well. S tier, again, very self-explanatory. CJ Stroud and Jaden Daniels are going to be in the tier below, a very tiny tier. Stroud's got a great matchup against Jacksonville, who looks so awful, like Colts, Bears, and Panthers level awful. They look absolutely atrocious. They got schooled against Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills last week. I think now with all these receiving options for the Houston Texans, you're going to see him go into that game and just absolutely kick butt. CJ Stroud's going to reap the benefits of that, obviously. And then Jaden Daniels, coming off a great game against Cincinnati, is able to pull the upset, is able to help Terry McLaurin produce. Zach Ertz gets a little usage there as well. And his rushing upside, again, undeniable and definitely valid for why he's moving up these rankings as well for our weekly stuff. So I think you're going to continue to see Daniels be on the up, and this is a great matchup in week 4 against the Cardinals. It has the highest Vegas line of the week.
In the B tier here, we're going to start with Christian Kirk. You going to laugh?
That was hilarious.
We're going to start with Patrick Mahomes, actually. With Mahomes, I was looking last night. He's only gone over 20 points between last year and this year 5 times total. And that's like 20 games. I mean, Mahomes is really not giving you a huge advantage compared to like starting a guy with rushing upside. And so him and Burrow and Prescott are all guys. And Dak, honestly, we moved up a little bit because he had 29 points in a game that they lost. But, these are all guys that you're still comfortable starting. They all have pretty good matchups this week. But, you're going to start the rushing upside guys over them. They're still going to be starters for the guys you drafted. If you drafted these guys, you're still going to put them in your starting lineup.
Yeah, and then top of the C tier, we'll have Jordan Love, who will continue to move up as he kind of eases back into his normal self after this MCL sprain. I mean, he's kind of coming back a lot faster than a lot of people expected. He might be rushing himself into coming back and playing, which is understandable, but he might not be as crazy good and mobile as he was before the injury for a couple of weeks, but he will be at the top of the seats here. And then Baker Mayfield coming off of a rough performance against Denver. That was a tough matchup. I think he'll be okay. And then Justin Fields is also going to be in this tier a lot higher than normal. It's because he's playing the Colts defense. Of all the weeks that I'm comfortable starting Justin Fields, this would be the week that I'm comfortable starting Justin Fields. Trust me, he's going to be fine. And then Jared Goff, Purdy, Derek Carr, those kind of pass-happy guys that any given week can put up 20, 25. They can also put up 12 to 15 because they don't really have any rushing upside. Anthony Richardson going to be at the tail end of this tier because he cannot throw a ball worth a darn, dude. It is so bad. He can put up 30 points because of his rushing upside, or he can score 2 against the Pittsburgh Steelers defense in week 4. I'm leaning more towards 2 because I mean, that entire defense knows how bad Anthony Richardson is as a passer. I think they're going to make his life absolutely miserable this week.
And then the last two tiers here for quarterback, you're going to have Kirk Cousins, who's looking better, by the way. I think he might move up a tier here soon.
Yeah.
Cousins, Herbert, Darnold, Smith, Watson. Rodgers has looked better, honestly. I think Rodgers, maybe you could start thinking about moving to the top of this tier as well. But all of these guys, again, unless you're in super flex leagues, you're not really starting these guys. As well as guys in the F tier, Minshew, Daniel Jones, Andy Dalton, and Caleb Williams. And even Bo Nix here. I'll put Bo Nix on here because Bo Nix has had some rushing upside recently. But these are all guys, again, unless you're in a Superflex league, you're not starting these guys. And if you are in a Superflex leagues, here are the rankings for them. This is how we have them ranked this week. But there you go, our complete ultimate rankings for week 4. Do us a favor. If you enjoy the ultimate rankings, drop a like. It takes literally 1 second and it helps us a ton. And subscribing tells us we're doing a good job. So we appreciate you doing those two things for us. Appreciate you guys so much. We'll see you later.